Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle. Today I'm speaking with Roheel Ahmad, a managing partner at Forsyth Barnes, which is a global mid to executive level search firm with offices in London, New York, and soon LA. They're on the FT 250 list of fastest growing businesses for the last 3 years running, and they're the #1 e-tail talent partner. In our conversation, we talk about how Forsyth's business model is different than most other recruiters, and they focus on e-retail, sports entertainment, and fintech. Really great conversation that I think you'll enjoy. When we hear so much bad news of a slowing economy and negativity, it's great to speak with someone who's positive, upbeat, creative, and really making things happen. So thanks, Roheel, for that. If you'd like to learn more about Forsyth Barnes, you can catch up with them on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube under the handle Forsyth Barnes. That's at FORSYTHBARNES. Now, if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this podcast, why not reach out and drop me an email or give me a call so we can chat further about it. And I'll put my contact info as well as Roheel's in the show notes. Thanks, and now on to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm Gordon Coyle, the host of the show, and today we've got Roheel Ahmad with us from Forsyth Barnes, which is an executive search firm located in the UK as well as in New York. And we've, just before hitting record, we started some great conversation, and I said, oh wait, stop. Let's get this recorded because it was going in the right direction. So Roheel, welcome to the show. I'm going to ask you to spend a couple of minutes, introduce yourself and the firm and what you're doing, and then we can kind of jump into it.
Yeah, cool. So we're a mid to senior talent firm, originated in London, but have grown globally and been working across Europe, across the US, the UK markets, Asian markets as well, for a number of years now as well. So it was always in our makeup, and we always knew that we were going to become a global business. We just got delayed with COVID, to be honest. We've been working in the sports and entertainment market since about 2018. We were meant to make a move in 2020, but for obvious reasons that got delayed. And then as soon as the embassies opened back up in 22 at our end, we got those exemptions first. We're traveling back and forth a lot whilst the borders are still pretty much closed. And then as soon as it properly opened, we've had people relocate from the UK. We've hired people out in the US, and we're building out our New York office right now with a view to then expand to the West Coast as soon as possible as well.
Great. So let's jump back into the conversation we're having, because I asked the question, what else do you do? Is it just executive search? And Roheel was going to start a story, and I'd like to continue that, about working with a firm to grow it. And it goes beyond just people skills. So we were talking about, it was a retailer, correct?
Yeah, so it's a fashion brand based out of New York. They operate across the US and globally as well, but more across the US. And I guess what we were talking about before is I really enjoy working with the global brands and businesses. Don't get me wrong, your Nikes and so on and so forth, Macy's, Coles, etc. But I think I take more pride, more joy in working with those growth businesses, those scaling type businesses, because we're able to have more of an impact by the people that we're introducing to those businesses. The strategy that then gets introduced to those businesses is then to be able to be implemented as well. Things like that I take a lot more joy from. So we're working with that fashion brand, and they were struggling in their marketing department. They pretty much outsourced it all, right? But they wanted to bring that in-house as part of their strategy going forwards. So for us, it wasn't just a case of, well, what are you looking for? And we'll go and find the individual. We've actually helped consult with them on the kind of person they should get out from the marketplace in relation to what else is happening in the fashion world.
Mhm.
And actually, the conversations then went from, rather than just an individual, how could we're there consulting, advising them on how to structure their whole marketing department. So actually, you need this kind of person with this type of background first. Then from there, we'd recommend you go and get this person with this type of background, which complements their skill sets. And then we'd recommend having this kind of structure, this kind of layer, this kind of management and leadership structure within the marketing department. And this is how many people it would take to achieve what we think you want to achieve in the way that you want to achieve it. So we're actually helping them formulate not just their business growth, their strategy within marketing, even how to bonus and remunerate those individuals as well. And then what the next few years looks like for them in order to become the kind of business that they want to become.
Interesting. So where do you get that sort of business intelligence to help a medium-sized firm put that all together? I mean, it's like you said, it's more than just finding them people. It's building out all of the infrastructure that goes behind the people. Where does a firm like yours get that intel?
So I'd love to take the credit personally, but it's like in terms of the detailed level of knowledge within marketing, I don't personally have that, right? I've got more of experience in other areas. But that was my marketing lead. He's been in the industry for a good number of years. His job day in, day out is to network, understand what people are doing, what their strategies are, why they're doing that, the impact that it has on those particular businesses, an understanding of would that work for an SME business? Would it work for a growth type business? Would it work in a corporate setting and environment? Is that individual's makeup, ambition, cultural fit better suited to which type of business? And again, even that is within sectors. Is it fashion? Is it sports and that kind of thing, like sports apparel and that kind of thing? So that's my people, and that's kudos to them for the networks that they build and foster daily, and then the understanding that they take and their knowledge and specialism within their industries as well.
Mm-hmm. And what areas does Forsyth Barnes focus in terms of verticals and niches?
Yeah, so if we're talking industry sectors, our three main core sectors that we tend to operate in are what we call e-tail. So online retail predominantly, businesses that are making that shift. Again, it's so interesting to see the differences between the US market, which I think that online piece has really been sped up with COVID. But I think the UK, European markets are probably a little bit further ahead in their buying habits and being online. But to see that transformation now is so exciting. And again, we're able to help businesses on that journey now.
Mm-hmm.
The sports and entertainment, so we deal with a lot of the organizations, the rights holders, the governing bodies across NFL, NBA, MLB, etc. as well, and then fintech as well. And so that often leads us to the technology sectors when we're working in those fintech businesses. So there are three main industry sectors.
Pretty different types of businesses.
Do you know what? When you first think about it, most people do say that, but there's actually a greater link than people believe. So if you look at the way each of those sectors is developing and changing and so on as well, within sports across the world, things are changing. You've got the fan experience element of things that are changing. They're tending to look for people outside of the sports world now who can actually talk about fan retention, which isn't too different from things like customer retention that comes from that e-tail world and retail world. So sometimes there's a crossover there. Secondary to that, there's only so much more that the clubs can keep charging fans, or the stadiums and the arenas can keep charging fans. Can't keep exponentially rising ticket prices. So now they're looking at other revenue generation channels, and it's kind of up and down in the movement for it. But one of the big things that we're seeing on a global scale is organizations releasing things like their own NFTs, their own cryptos. Players now being paid part of their contract in cryptocurrencies from the clubs as well. So then that relies on things like the expertise that we've got in the fintech sector, and people to be able to come in and plug into that as well. So actually, they're probably greater linked and aligned, and the way that data is now playing a role in each of those sectors is now greater aligned than it ever has been. We just see some of those alignments getting stronger as well.
Interesting. And fundamentally, every business, regardless of sector, has some operational pieces that, when it comes down to people, are similar from one sector to the other, whether it's leadership, accounting, marketing, distribution, all those things. everybody's got to have them.
Yep. Yeah, it is. And especially if we look at, we do a lot of work in the data world. You don't always need the industry specialism from that. In fact, some of that diversity of idea and background is really prevalent. I think a lot of, probably most of the people that we're placing within that data world are not necessarily from the industry that we're now helping in. But yeah, I think there's a greater appreciation for diversity of ideas and backgrounds than there ever has been. So that helps.
Mm-hmm. And how big is your firm? How many people are working there
So
between
globally, about 80 heads at the moment.
80?
Yeah, and we're a bootstrapped business. So we're now in our 8th year. So we've never taken a dime from anyone. We don't owe anyone to anything to the banks or anything like that either. So one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that we've grown to where we've grown to so far, and we're still on the growth trail. Is it's all paid for by the successes of our people and the good work that we do with our clients. So again, that makes me proud, because if it was, we're doing things in the right way, essentially, because clients are coming back to us time and time again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would agree with you. It's a rewarding feeling that you're doing it on your own dime, and you're not, you don't have a bank behind you or a private equity firm behind you pushing you along and kind of aiding in the success. So it makes every win more valuable, I would imagine.
We're spending our own money as wisely as we possibly can.
Yeah. And with that growth, what have the challenges been that you guys have kind of been facing other than COVID? Anything unique?
I mean, I'm cautious when I say this in the way that I say it as well, but COVID for us, we actually had a record year. I mean, we've had 7 consecutive years of growth every single year,
Mm-hmm.
and COVID wasn't any different for us. I'd say the major challenges are what worked for us previously when we may have been sort of a 30-man operation doesn't apply now. And there'll be some people that come along that journey who will be able to make that shift and that transformation, even on our standard processes, the way we operate, the way we engage with people, clients, etc., might need to shift as we become a bigger business. Our mindsets might need to shift. Our internal cultures need to be more and more diverse. And we were very, very male heavy as a business previously. And I'm so proud of the work that we've done, the intentional work that we've done to spread some of that diversity, where we've got a lot more females in the business. And I don't think we're far off 50-50 if we're not already.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that are those kind of cultural elements of the business growing. And where we are now, when we're at 150 people, and again, 4 offices globally, that itself will become a challenge as well. And then I think the big challenge around that time, which we're starting to see the beginnings of now, is making sure that we're keeping the business connected on a global scale, which we try and do as much as possible, but it's not always easy. It's not as easy as hopping on a train, a couple of hours, and you've got your whole business together. Now it's flights and people's availabilities and things like that to be able to keep everyone together.
Mm-hmm.
But we're trying to manage that as best as we can.
I would imagine between New York and the UK alone, even the time zone differences makes it a little complex.
Yeah, it does. So I'm out every 3rd to 4th week. I fly sort of back and forth and so on as well. So yeah, that does, and it has an impact. And then when I'm in LA, even though it seems like it's just 3 hours from New York, it's actually 8 hours to my UK offices.
Yeah.
That itself has an impact as well. Quite often, half of the day, most of the day is kind of gone by the time I'm up in the mornings and things like that. And so I'm kind of catching up. My sleep gets impacted pretty badly because I end up checking my messages and my emails at sort of 2 a.m. It takes me a few days to adjust to those. And then we just done an incentive where we do sort of 2 company holidays a year. And someone from the New York office was flown out to Dubai. So that's about a 14-hour straight flight as well.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it took her a day when we got to Dubai for her to adjust and kind of get into the swing of things. It took her about a day or 2 again to get back to being on New York time again.
I had lunch with some underwriting partners of ours that are in London. We met in New York for lunch on Wednesday, and one of the fellows had been back and forth between the US, mostly on the Eastern Seaboard, back and forth to London like 6 times in the course of a month. And I'm like, I can't imagine how your sleep is all fouled up. He goes, actually, I think all of the back and forth, it kind of got all jumbled up. It wasn't that bad. I'm like, well, good for you.
Yeah, it's do you know what? And the little cultural differences, right? I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but I stumbled across the sleeping tablets that you can get at the airport in New York. You can't get it in London. Like they don't sell sleeping tablets past security. Um, so I thought, John, let's try it. Let's get some. Let's try it. See if that's going to help anything as well. So it's trying to do whatever you can. And if you've kind of got to stay up through the night to get to the next night and try and get into a regular pattern, then it's what's needed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That can be a bit of a challenge, I'm sure. Uh,
Yeah.
who would you like consider to be an ideal client? You talked about this one fashion brand that was moving, kind of growing very rapidly. Who's
Yep.
really an ideal client for you guys and why?
I would say the ideal that we do some of our best work with is those growth and scale organizations. One where they have an exciting story to tell for themselves,
Hmm.
and how can we then partner with them to bring that to life? I think one of the things that we're trying to do in the industry is help change and innovate in our industry. And that if I said to you now, typically, how does any business advertise the next hire or the next few hires that they're going to make? It's the age-old thing, which hasn't really changed over several decades. It's just where it's posted has changed in the sense of it's a job ad, right? And a job ad is usually comprised of a paragraph, maybe two at best, about the business, a paragraph about the job, some bullet points to summarize it, and that's really it in terms of the makeup. Some of the better ones will sell an opportunity. Some of the poorer ones will just tell you what the opportunity is, and there's a difference between the two. And that hasn't changed. It used to be in the papers. That's now become online and LinkedIn and things like that. But that's never really changed. So what we're doing with our clients, and we've got a library of these now on our YouTube as well, is we're trying to bring that process into the modern age, the digital age, the social media type of age, where we get our marketing department to work with theirs to actually build it in the form of digital media. So rather than just a typical job ad, we'll go out and create video content, which we will produce. It looks like it comes from the client, but actually it's done by us to try and get more than just about the role out there, but actually more than that, the culture, the business ambition through a video. And then how do we strategically mark that out there through the social media platforms? We also understand the algorithms behind them. So we tend to use them to the benefits of the client. So we know our own audience. We know the millions of viewership that we get through our network on things like LinkedIn and so on. We also understand when we get the greatest viewership on things like that. So when to post on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, et cetera, as well.
Hmm.
So we're trying to innovate in that way by bringing things and taking influences from what we see in the tech sector and the digital media agency type sector compared to what has traditionally been done in the talent sector, UK and US and globally for the last 2 or 3 decades. But coming back to the original question, it would be a growth organization. It would be someone with a good story to tell as to and what their proposition is. Someone that we can either market or help to develop their EVP, and that's employee value proposition. And actually, quite often, most businesses have two stories to tell, and one is to their customers or clients, and the other is to their internal, their careers, their people that they want to join, and the people that are still currently there.
Hmm.
So, how can we develop the secondary piece to help them grow as an organization? Someone who wants to work in partnership, in a true partnership, and sees us as an extension of their business, rather than you get some people who kind of just it's a lot more transactional. Just get me a result,
Yeah,
and that's it.
yeah.
And look, have we delivered to those? Yes, of course we have. It's not as fun. We can't engage with it as much. We can't support those businesses as much who just see it as a very transactional, get me the result, as opposed to, along with the result, I will make sure that you've got the best service possible.
I would imagine that in those relationships where it's get me that result, it's a vendor relationship, whereas where it's more creative and you're doing
Yeah,
things, it's more of a partnership relationship.
yeah, spot on. And I think a lot of it just comes back to people's experiences, what they're going through in the business at that time.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of factors that impact on that. But I think the best clients that we're able to do our best work with is when they understand that we're there to support and work with their business. as opposed to just supply at the end result or an individual, because then it becomes transactional for them too.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't build that gap and that bridge between the individual who's about to join your business and your business. Whereas with the others, we can, because we can create the story, we can create the relationship beforehand. So effectively, that onboarding is started as part of our process, not actually when they've on day one when they've joined the business.
Mm-hmm. Interesting comment on the video. We've deployed that as well. In fact, I've got a search going on now, and we're using it kind of in the middle of applicant qualification and next steps. And it's me talking about what this job is about, what we expect, how we work, what our culture is like. And what I have found is that it creates excitement, and the people that engage with it, they're like, I got to work for this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very powerful.
It is, yeah. And then we go again. Some of the cultural differences. There are clients that I've spoken to in the US who have been baffled when I talk to them about the interview process that we put them through at our end before you would ever see them. And they're like, what, you actually interview them first? Like, yeah, why? Are you not used to that? It's like, no, we just receive the resumes that are kind of pinged over to us. We have to sift through them. We then have to do the first round of interviews. And like, we've gone through about a 3-stage process before they ever come to you. So we're pretty confident that technically, culturally, they're a good fit for your business. And so we're submitting that shortlist of people that we've vetted already, rather than a bunch of people for you to get through, 30, 40, 50 names for you to get through.
Interesting. What kind of trends, of course, everybody is thinking, oh, work from home, work from home, work from home.
Yeah.
Aside from that, what are the trends that are going on in employment and search that you're seeing today?
I think at the moment it's going through, there's a lot of bad press in the news on both sides of the pond.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of talk about recession and so on as well. I think that has an impact into the general mood and feel. Employment always goes through certain cycles of busyness and so on as well. And actually, we're still pretty busy, but it's then kind of fighting off what you're seeing in the media all the time about recession and unemployment figures, and especially in the tech sector, with a lot of the bigger firms, your Twitters and so on, 20% of the workforce being let go, 15% of the workforce being let go, and so on and so forth as well. I think both industries are still finding their way a little bit, and partly the hangover from COVID and the whole work from home piece as well, where some businesses have kind of followed a trend of it might have been a complete work from home policy, or they've gone big on the hiring just and now they're feeling the pinch a little bit from it as well. Whereas in a lot of the areas of specialism that we work with, we're not necessarily seeing a pinch on the amount of businesses that are needing our support, because we're probably at the more senior end of things of the marketplace. And so there's always been more of a specialist role to play in that as well. But I do think at the lower levels of businesses and people's careers, there's a real struggle there at the moment as well, because there's more and more people on the market than we've ever seen before. Flip side of that, companies are now receiving, for a single role, 60, 90, 120 applicants, like for certain positions. Now they're looking at saying, how do we get through 120 people for one opportunity here? Mm-hmm. How do we even whittle that down to 10, even 10's too many? How do we get that down from there? So we're at the same time, we're having conversations with some where they're needing our support, and actually because of our specialisms and expertise, to be able to distinguish between that 10, how do they get that to 5, for instance, because they're unsure of that. And so, yeah, there's some of the challenges.
So with the recession concerns, is that on the employer side about, not wanting to blow up to be too big and then have an overhead that they can't manage? Or are you thinking of that from the perspective of the employees looking for work?
Mainly the employers, yeah. I think at the time when Elon Musk was still going through the takeover process, it was Jack Dorsey who came out and apologized and said that they had bloated Twitter with the amount of people that they'd hired. They'd actually, with the best intentions at the time, but in hindsight, Twitter was a bloated organization, and they'd actually grown it too big. So I know Elon gets a lot of the bad press for the cuts that he's made, and don't get me wrong, I don't think he's called everything right there either. Um, there's also a part of me that thinks the guy's got a pretty good track record, and even though it might look one way, there's probably a multitude of reasons behind the scenes that for what he's doing. But I think when you look at those types of businesses where there was a big bubble for a long time, right? And I don't think it's just if it was just one of those types of firms who are laying off people because they've made a mistake, as opposed to Facebook have laid off a bunch of people, Amazon has laid off, I think, 20, 30,000 globally as well. I think that's a sign of what they were doing before and in that bubble versus what they've realized is they probably were a bit bloated in a number of things.
Something else that you mentioned a second ago was the number of candidates that apply for a position. So
Yep.
we've got historically low unemployment in the US, but it does seem, in my speaking with other employers, that they post an ad and there's an overwhelming response.
Yep.
Is that just a sign of employee dissatisfaction at work, that everybody's always looking for a new opportunity? How do you explain kind of this overwhelming response when there's like almost full employment in the US?
Yeah, it is. And again, those employment figures will be talking about the whole picture, right? Whereas we're operating in a very specific area of the marketplace. And at the moment, it is that specific area where a lot of people in the tech world have been let go, or things have changed in their businesses, and so as well. So there is some difficulties where there's still a lot of need within data and AI and machine learning and things like that as well. But there's been more people than ever who are now available or looking. Again, I come back to things like where businesses, they'd gone all in on work from home, and now some are starting to reverse that policy, but others haven't. So I think a lot of people are jumping ship for those more work from home type opportunities. But I think we're in a very weird period where half the market's doing one thing, we're not normalized yet as a market, and we're not settled as it was before. I think it's going to take a little bit more time for companies to find their way, whether that lands on a full hybrid type model, whether that is still work from home. I don't think it will be as work from home as it has been for obvious reasons for the last few years as well. I think companies will start to come back more to a hybrid perspective. I think certain roles within that are right to do on a work from home type basis, but certain positions, they really aren't made for it. And I think people start to realize that. And I guess one of my other fears is on a generational level, I think some of people coming into their careers or still at the early stages of their careers will really suffer. And because they won't have built those relationship building and networking type skills that you need being in an office and around other people, they won't learn through osmosis. They won't have that ability to kind of climb the rungs in a business in the same way because they're not in person, and it's harder to lead properly remotely. It's harder to engage with properly remotely. So it then becomes a bit more tactical, a bit more by numbers management and leadership than it necessarily does a great orator or someone who can take you round the block and have a chat and perk you up. You're down here now, you're feeling good about yourself, those kind of things. It is so much harder to do that over a Zoom or over a phone call and so on as well. So I do worry about the coming time, several years where the generations are kind of coming up, of what they'll miss out on if they're in a pure work from home type environment.
I would agree. And I also think you've kind of brought up 2 points, that there's a certain educational vacuum for the employees that they're missing if they're not in the office, exposed to other people and all the intellectual kind of capital that kind of floats around in the ether inside of an office. But I think there's also a gap there for leaders that you just mentioned. You know, if you're working with somebody, you can kind of see, well, they're coming in late every day. They're really not engaged. They're not their old self. I got to take them aside and have a conversation. That's very difficult if you're remote and the only time you see that person is on a Zoom call for 20 minutes or something like that.
It is.
And I think
you're managing by. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think there's a skills gap there that we really haven't identified and we don't know how to fix. Because it kind of crept up on us and we said, oh, we got to work from home. Oh, work from home is pretty good. Oh, I don't really need to renew that lease. Okay, well, I'll work from home. That's great. And now we've got like employees that are shaking their, scratching their head saying, I like working from home, but I also miss all the people that I used to work with. And now we've got leaders that are saying, how do I make sure our culture is intact and our structural existence stays intact and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, there is. I think there's many benefits to it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti it by any stretch. The commutes and so on. If I look at typical commutes in New York, in London, I mean, when I'm in the UK, typically I'm traveling 3 to 4 hours a day. So from where I live.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's loads of benefits from that perspective. But then are you managing through numbers and through productivity alone? What if someone's still producing, but for all intents and purposes, they're not happy? How do you spot that unless you're around them? Because
Right.
anyone can kind of come on and put a face on a Zoom or something like that. But it's not that. It's noticing when they're getting up and going to lunch, their demeanor, their body language, their facial expressions, noticing how often they might be looking for like work avoidance for a break and things like that. It's those little conversations that you miss out on culturally. And I think the leaders and generally the older generations have been through that where they've benefited from it. So the work from home perspective doesn't impact them personally as much or their development as much because they have had that time in the office.
Right.
Again, come back to those coming through their careers, those learning, those who are entering their professional careers now. I worry about the damage it will do to their capabilities. And I think at some point it'll come full circle where it will then be like, no, we've recognized that after a decade that actually this is harmful to some degree and we need to be stronger. Then you've got a whole generation of who are meant to be our future leaders who have missed out on those key skills and those people skills. What do we do? Wait for the next generation? So that I think is coming down the pipe at some point.
Yeah. That's a good point that I've never kind of thought about long term. You know, yeah, it's fine for junior folks to kind of work through this, but those junior people are not always going to be junior. Those are
Yeah,
the ones that are going to lead in even a mid-sized firm. They're going to be on a leadership panel at some point. Where are they going to get those people skills from?
yeah, that's yeah. I know it is further down the line, but I'd be lying if I hadn't thought about that for our business, for instance. So
Mm-hmm.
it's I think there will be impacts of that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Roheel, it's been a good conversation, but I want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. Are there any subjects that you wanted to kind of get on the table that you'd like to kind of kick around for a couple of minutes before we wrap up?
No, look, I think you've kind of covered everything that I would have suggested anyway, to be honest. I think there's so much going on. I think one of the things as well is mainstream news is so easy to kind of get caught up in the negative, bad news sells, right? We know that. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's so much good going on. There's so many brilliant stories, growing businesses. It's never been easier to grow a business and to start and grow a business than it has in so many respects. I'm not saying that it is easy, but with the resources out there, the knowledge and access to information out there as well. So for all of these things where we say there's problems here or this is an issue and so on as well, I think there's a collective need for everyone to kind of come together and say, well, what are the good that can come from these situations? How can we benefit from it? How can we pivot, for instance, as well? Even pre-COVID, could you really get deals and partnerships done exclusively over Zooms? Probably not. There's still an element of we will do like 80-90% of it, but we're still going to want to meet you and shake a hand in person and things to get business done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now there's so much more global collaboration we're able to do, and the technologies come on through all of this period as well. So I think we need to make sure that we're finding our way and our path to be able to do that and using those tools to our benefit to be able to, at least for us personally anyway, grow at the rate that we have been using that technology and making sure that we're catching the wind with ourselves rather than trying to fight the tide itself.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good point. There is so much bad news around that. In fact, I'm a very traditional person. I read the paper version of the newspaper every morning, and it's gotten to the point where I'm like, just turn the pages quickly, one right after the other, because I'm just like so tired of the same terrible stories that happen all the time. It is good to hear good news, good stories about growth, experimentation, new ideas. Um, I think there is so much going on. I mean, you touched on AI, artificial intelligence, a little bit earlier. Um, whether it's technology, AI, crypto, there's so much interesting stuff going on in the business world that we don't get a lot of attention to, that it's really valuable when we can talk about it and explore it and see it and see the result of it, which is growth.
It is, yes. That AI piece, I think we're not even at the beginning yet of the impact that that's about to have. And almost like the Industrial Revolution, the way we will advance as a society as that starts to develop, I think will be absolutely huge. I don't think we even realize the full development of anywhere near that yet. So
yeah.
But again, looking forward to seeing how that impacts society, employment in general, technology, and how we operate in our daily lives with that in our lives as well. Again, I look at it as exciting rather than kind of harking back to, oh, well, in our day it used to be like this. It's brilliant. How do we further ourselves with these bits of technology and advancements that we've got coming ahead?
Yeah, for sure. Roheel, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, how's the best way to do that?
So I'm on Instagram, and probably more active on LinkedIn as well. So
Okay.
Roheel Ahmad at Forsyth Barnes is the name of the business. They can easily, happily reach out to me on either of those platforms.
So if they looked on Instagram or LinkedIn, look for Forsyth Barnes.
Yeah, company's Forsyth Barnes. Yep.
Okay.
Or my personal profile in any of those, and yeah, they can reach out to me there.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Good conversation.
Yeah, great being on it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So in closing, if you've got an interesting story like Roheel's and you'd like to be on this show, give me a call, drop me an email. I'll have my contact info as well as Roheel's in the show notes, and I'd love to chat with you about it further. And until next time, everybody, stay well.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.